So welcome to our third virtual coffee talk. It's a pleasure to have you all on board. Early, at least in my time, it's early Friday morning. So as for the others, I had also thought about the topic and then also about the picture, the best illustrating what it is all about. So today we are talking about cutover management. I used as a picture a train because I also believe if the cutover is starting, it's like a train, difficult to stop and to navigate around. So from my perspective, this picture illustrates a little bit the theme of a cutover. You are getting through a tunnel and then at the end, the light is there. So my subtitle is the best comes last. And like all the other cutover sessions and all the coffee talks we have done before, we will divide the session in two parts. The first part is more on a theoretical part where we are shortly presenting how a cutover should be managed and orchestrated. And afterwards, we are doing a discussion where you can also ask questions. This time, I'm very pleased to have two guest speakers on board. On one side, George Ntamark joined. George is a senior program manager from HSBC. We together have gone through 1 to 2 cutovers, and it was a pleasure to work with George together on that one, and we had quite a lot of experience together. So I welcome George. He will later on introduce himself shortly and give also a little bit his experience in cutover management, and is then open to your questions. On the other side, I have then also Key. He is a founder of Cutover, and as the name already announced, quite familiar with cutover management. He will also introduce himself. Cutover is a platform providing support as a tool for cutover management. I think personally, as virtual cutovers are becoming more and more the reality nowadays, that tooling and the platform is quite important. Therefore, we gave it also a space here because we think it's one of the success factors. So welcome, Key, as well, and looking forward to your story about cutover. So, and for everybody in the call, please use the chat functionality. Vlad will be acting as moderator, observing the chat and already answer certain questions. And later on, we'll also collect all your questions that we can give it a little bit of structure in the discussion. So, what is my story? I'm usually starting this coffee talks with giving you 3 points of my story, why I also believe cutover management is quite important in the IT delivery space. So I have selected here 3. And my first story is going back to my first core banking implementation, when later on I was also acting as a warranty lead for the provider. And it was quite impressive because directly with my first core banking migration, we were ending up in the press. And since then, this is what I'm always saying, if you want to have a successful core banking migration and also cutover, try to not be in the press. And why are you in the press? Because so many things went wrong. At least on our sides, I can confirm we have migrated wrongly data, we have forgotten interfaces, the software was not properly tested. So lots of things went wrong, which is a classical example. So therefore, also for a cutover, and that would be one of my conclusions, you need to do a proper risk assessment if you're really ready to do the cutover. My second point is then from a later cutover, where we were dividing all the cutover tasks. And in our first assumption, we assumed one task should take 30 minutes. And in the first one, it was taking 1.5 days. That's a long difference. And it took us more or less 10 test iterations, therefore more or less 10 months later that we were ending up really at the 30 minutes we have before calculated, and which was fitting in our time schedule. But also this is giving you an example that testing cutovers is quite important. Lots of people are believing you can do 2 dress rehearsals and that's it. I'm still a strong believer that you need much more iterations to have really a proper cutover. And then the third one is also lessons learned, maybe that you not just need one cutover manager, you need more of them, and always one person should be on duty doing the whole cutover execution as the train is running. So this means you are not differentiating between day and night doing the cutover. This means you should have more people planned in as cutover manager and not just one person who knows everything, because you need to share at least the duty between 2 or 3 people. That would be a little bit my story. So first, try to avoid to be in the press, one of the big rules for cutover. Then never underestimate the time it takes until you get to a smooth execution. And then plan in to have more than one cutover manager in your preparation. So at the time the train starts running, you need to have at least 2 to 3 people knowing what is going on. So this brings me a little bit to the theoretical part. So we will shortly go through the cutover framework, which I have developed with the team together over the last years. Then a little bit through pitfalls and success factors. And then afterwards, we are starting then with the discussion. So what is a cutover? The cutover is more or less the last activity of a project, and it's usually an IT delivery project, very often also a transformation project. It's the moment when the developed product is put into production. Actually, I like the picture with the jumping person below, because usually you jump from one side to the other side, and there's a certain insecurity if the jump is also successful. Therefore, I like the picture, but it's indicating left the old situation and right more or less the new situation. But of course, a cutover also has lots of challenges. Therefore, I must admit, I like also this picture in my story of a train. This is something you don't want to see. You usually want to have a fast, on-time cutover. And if you see this picture, you envision already that this train will have quite some delays. And not just delays in minutes, but most probably more in hours or days. And this is something which you don't want. You usually want to have something a little bit more like this. It should be modern and fast, and you envision when seeing this picture that the train is most probably also in time. So that's also what the difference is between a good and a little bit a stressful cutover. You want to be with your cutover in time, always meeting your deadlines to have then also the go decision at the time where it's forecasted, because then also people should be there in order to take the decision. That's a little bit the pictures I'm seeing there. Now, going through it, our cutover framework is giving you more or less an inventory list of all the different areas which you should take care at your cutover. It's starting with the cutover strategy, then you need to assess also your cutover scope. Out of that, you should develop a cutover plan. This should be then guided by governance. You should have a team managing the overall cutover. You should test and train your cutover. And then if it's coming to test and training and execution, you should ensure that you have also a command center where all the links are coming together. Once I also described to somebody, a cutover is a little bit also event management, because you have lots of people and you need to orchestrate everything around it. In the past, this was more organizing hotels and food. Nowadays, virtually, this is more ensuring that video conferences are there and that people can connect and can communicate with each other. So for sure, the event management nowadays is changing a little bit, but it's still there. Then on the other side, you have also readiness assessment. You need to ensure that the project is ready to do the cutover. This is leading then also to risk management. Also, not just you need to be ready, you need to be aware of the risks which are in front of you and if you really want to take them. to avoid to be in the press. Sometimes it might be useful to wait with a cutover 1 or 2 months and correct certain things before doing it, than just jumping into it and having a high risk then for operations later on. Bringing me then also to reporting, also dashboard should be there and all the reports should be there. And of course, you should always have a rollback plan, because yes, at a cutover, certain things could go wrong. Therefore, a strategy how to roll back is always recommended. And nowadays, I would also say tooling quite important already in the past, but nowadays with virtual cutovers might be even more important, as collaboration between the different parties is more important than before. So I would like to go in the next minutes to some of these points, starting with the strategy. I think this is also very often forgotten at the beginning of a project. If you are designing your project where the scope is set in stones and how you deliver, you should not forget also to define your cutover strategy. I have listed here the 3 most obvious strategies you can have. You either have a big bang, you have a phased approach, or you have parallel operations. Personally, I must say the most I have seen are big bangs, so all at once, which is on one side also the easiest to test, but of course also perceived as a very risky situation where you directly jump into the water, and of course there might be lots of things going wrong. So therefore, lots of people perceive the phased approach as a more safe approach, and of course the parallel operation as the one with the less risks. Parallel operations, where you have 2 systems running in parallel and you compare, and by that also have a longer test phase, for sure is the most safe option, but also most work and most costly option. Currently, in my experience, I have seen this option more in the energy market, where you have a high dependency on systems going right, and to be really sure that there are no slippages, no defects forgotten, they're usually having parallel operations. In the world where I'm mostly operating in is the financial industry, and there I have seen mostly big banks, but also partly phased approaches. I believe you need to decide at the beginning which approach you need to take, because also your development and all your training and testing is hardly depending on it. Therefore, you should take a decision at the beginning of the project. With the strategy, you should also write down your assumptions. What should be the guiding principles for your cutover, which then is serving as input for all your different teams who have then to implement the software and everything around it. I will not go through it, it's just giving here some indications. If you want to have the slides afterwards, just send me an email and I will send it to you. Then something which is very important also starting at the beginning of a project to understand really the cutover scope. It's starting with a detailed assessment of the application landscape, is going to the data, which in complex migrations is migrated from the old application landscape to the new application landscape. But it includes also the operational changes to processes and procedures. And then as a 4th point, I have more or less a collection point of all other activities, because your cutover scope is also the governance, who has to take which decision, but also last functional tests, which should serve you as input for your final decision. After you have done the scope assessment at the beginning of the project, I would also recommend to do a high-level plan. What are really the big boxes you have to include in your cutover, and you should put them a little bit over the timeline, understanding what are the things you have to do, and you should also think a little bit how should the time look like. Am I starting Friday afternoon, have my go decision on Sunday at lunchtime, and then the business should start on Monday morning. So roughly, you should have an understanding what needs to be done within this time. And then with preparation, you should get to a cutover master plan. I like to have a plan on one slide. to use also as a communication to all participants and all stakeholders. This gives them a little bit an overview, but of course, this is not what you are executing. When it's coming to the execution, I'm usually trying to have this concept that you have a master plan, and behind each box of the master plan, you have storybooks, where in detail is listed what are the tasks which should be executed. Of course, a storybook could then have also a sub-storybook and supplementary documents listing in detail what the procedures are which should be executed. So easily on a cutover, you could have around 1,000 to 3,000 tasks which are executed. If even more is involved, of course, the list of tasks is growing tremendously. And of course, you would understand that nobody will be able as one person to manage 3,000 tasks. Therefore, you need to give it a little bit of structure. And this is usually the structure I'm using at cutovers, to start with a plan on a page, then the storybooks, which are giving the boxes on my master plan content, and then underlying it with supplementary documents. And as you have a master plan and a structure how you plan, you need also to have a certain governance. What we are using on our cutovers is a little bit this 4 steps approach for the governance. You have on one side the decision board. This is usually the executive board, which is taking the final decisions. They are fed by a control board, which is steering the execution of all the tasks. And then you have also usually a command center, which is managed by the cutover manager with his team, who are then responsible for the overall execution of all tasks. The storybook owners are responsible for the execution of their storybook and are reporting to the command center and therefore to cutover management. And of course, beside that, you need to have a huge support organization if things are going wrong, incidents, defects, that they can treat it fast. It's like the train. If the train is having a sudden stop, of course, you need to have people who are supporting you to get the train running again. Or if there is anything blocking on the road, you want to have people who are supporting you to get this unblocked. Here I have listed, but I will not go through all the details, the cutover management team. You should have for your cutover very soon after the project has started a team who is orchestrating the cutover preparation, doing all what is necessary in order to prepare, like all the storybooks, put them as one overall storybook together, understanding the dependencies at the beginning, also doing the cutover strategy, and then putting everything in place. I'm usually try to divide it by having somebody responsible for a storybook, somebody for logistics and communication, and then somebody for the readiness and acceptance. This is giving you a little bit of structure. I have listed here quite a lot of tasks for which the cutover management should be responsible. This is then also in the execution quite important, as they have to orchestrate the command center and then all the decision and control points which are part of the governance structure. So here you see a little bit the structure on a time plan for, let's say, a cutover weekend, or a little bit the overall cutover. You have decision points which are on the bottom from 1 to 6. You don't want to have your decision board meeting too often, but they should give you the approval to start your cutover procedures and to end them. And in the middle, you have quite a lot of control points where you check that the execution is going smooth. And of course, if you have control and decision points, you need to have also dashboards. Here, just an example of one where you have an overview of the outcome of the different control points. Of course, everything should be ideally green, but of course, in the execution of a cutover, there are popping up also certain issues, and you see them here marked as amber, giving you an indication that there are certain problems. Yeah, I have mentioned already before that test and training is quite important also for cutover. We are usually using a snowball effect, so trying to start small with the first cutover test and training runs. We call them MDRs, which is migration dry run, because usually the migration is the backbone of the cutover and then is enriched by more and more scope. Leading to dress rehearsals, where dress rehearsals are executed in real time. Usually I try to do migration dry runs during the week when people are there and can execute tasks and you have lots of support there. Dress rehearsal should be then executed at least 2 to 3. Sometimes if you're very good, maybe 1 is sufficient if you have done lots of MDRs before. Giving you confidence that you are able to execute the cutover in real time at weekend and the time which you really have foreseen in your storybook. Usually I would also say if you have a cutover and calculate backwards, when you should start training your cutover procedures and therefore also your migration ones, but also including all the supporting and additional activities you need to do for your infrastructure to be set up or for the application landscape. So I put in here on the timeline, I would start 6 to 9 months before the cutover to start training and to do at least once a month a run in order to repeat the procedures, to be able to have them in a perfect trained manner for the cutover. As a next point, I have also listed the cutover readiness. Before you start any cutover procedures, you should be sure that your project is really ready to be put into production. And for that, I have listed here 5 readiness criteria. Of course, you can divide it even more, maybe less, but I think this 5 is giving you some indications in which direction you should go. The first one is technical readiness, seeing that the infrastructure is there, that all the technical pieces are put together. Operational readiness is that business and IT know their procedures and processes, that you have also switched and everybody is informed how the new world should be operated. Then you have the platform readiness, so the new application landscape is ready to put in production. This is usually proven with the UIT. As a 4th point, you need also to ensure that your data is ready. Usually you should also include this in the UIT, but also there you should do it separately and really confirm completeness and correctness of data. And as a 5th point, you have the cutover readiness, that all your procedures for the cutover are ready. For example, the storybook is written in detail. Everybody knows what needs to be done. The procedures are documented, and also if somebody is ill, there's a replacement who could execute the task, not that you are then postponing because one key person is ill and you have never thought about a replacement of the person. So these are the cutover readiness criteria, which ideally you should assess at the beginning of your cutover procedures. So as a last point, I would also like to mention cutover tooling and the platform. I used here Cutover as a platform as an example. They, under the use case of big changes, are providing all the features you need for cutover, and I'm pretty sure Key later on will give us some more hints how the tool could be used for your cutover. I listed here a little bit more detailed, but due to time, I would jump to Pitfalls. As I said, if you would like to see or get the presentation, just send me an email. Pitfalls. What have I seen? What went wrong? The first one is a classical one. There is no dedicated cutover manager because the project team is believing and the project manager is believing he can take over this task. I think that's a big mistake because as a cutover manager, you need to fully concentrate on the execution of the cutover. where the project manager should more concentrate to manage the stakeholders in between. Then the next one, there is no cutover management team staffed. The project manager believes that this can be done by, let's say, the PMO and is mobilized just a few weeks before. I think also a big mistake, because also the cutover management team should have a certain routine. You should train it with the different MDRs and dress rehearsals. I have also seen cases that you don't do a cutover strategy at the beginning, which then is hurt you later on, because usually, especially if it's coming to data migration, you need to set certain direction at the beginning in which way you would like to see the cutover to happen, because especially for a data migration team, this is a key indicator what needs to be migrated. Then you have the cutover scope, also very often not really assessed in detail and often limited to data migration, but also the application landscape is quite important. You need to open and close interfaces. You need to understand which processes need to be stopped and which need to be restarted. So there in the application landscape lies quite a lot of analysis which is necessary to fully understand what is really necessary to move from an old application landscape to a new one. At the beginning, I mentioned it in between, but one of my cutovers, we have forgotten interfaces, and then clients were calling and asking, where is my interface? To avoid this, I can just recommend to fully assess the application landscape. Cutover tasks not documented and properly executed. Yes, this is quite a big lessons learned. You should ensure that all the tasks are really documented and people are also executing what is documented. And if it's not executed proper, they are correcting their documentation and not just in their head, they're remembering that they need to do something differently than documented. Especially important if people are getting ill and other people are executing the task. Then I would say time to train the cutover procedure, also very important, very often underestimated. Readiness assessment done in the last minute. So for me, doing a proper assessment of the readiness, very important, leading also then to the risk assessment. Nowadays, with regulators are getting more and more interested what is happening, very important to have also then an audit trail. Also then the governance should not just be limited to the project team, but to business and the stakeholders who are really owning afterwards the application landscape. They need to be involved in all the decisions. They need also to be involved in the execution. So in order not to blame then the project team, they have done the things, it was not their decision. And as a last point, I mentioned this already, very often there's no audit trail, then you have an internal audit and they are asking who has taken the decisions, where are the meeting minutes. Very important that you properly document and have a clear audit trail. Also something you should not underestimate it, this needs to be trained. Even writing meeting minutes is not so easy to have a proper documentation for later on. Success factors, just shortly going through it, what I think is important to have as a third point listed here, a clear cutover flight path. So as I said at the beginning, you should have somehow a snowball principle. So things are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. You're adding more scope and scope. So you should have a nice flight path knowing what should be added. And of course, this related also a little bit with KPIs to measure how successful have you been in adding more and more scope. Due to time, I will leave this because most of that I have mentioned already over the last minutes. And coming to my overall summary and then leading to the discussion. So if you're reaching the end of your tunnel, you are able then to celebrate achievements and success, avoiding to be in the press, celebrating if you're not in the press. So my summary would be cutover management is usually very complex, very administrative. We have also to admit that there are lots of administrative tasks which have to be taken care of, mostly underestimated, very often understaffed and hardly valued. But of course, I'm on the opinion a good cutover and therefore the ending of a project needs a very good flight path. You should give it priority. The cutover itself requests fast and right decisions. You're on a train, the train cannot easily be stopped. So you need to ensure that the right decisions are taken in order to ensure that you're going in the right direction. A good cutover is based on lots of trainings. It involves all stakeholders and must be valued also by the project manager, but also by the stakeholders. A good cutover manager is for sure not the junior on the project. It requires experienced and senior profiles who really orchestrate your cutover. So that would be a little bit my summary of cutover management, leading me now to our discussions and also then to our guest speakers. And now I would ask George and Key to turn on their microphone and maybe starting also with George to give his experience about cutover, what went wrong, what he believes as having done already quite some cutovers, what the success factors are for a successful cutover.
Thank you very much, Kerstin. Hello, everyone. My name is George Ntamark. I am currently a co-program manager for our core banking implementation for the private bank here in Asia. So we are rolling out Avaloq. We started this project, or this program, I should say, back in 2014. And to this date, we've done Hong Kong, we've done Switzerland, Luxembourg, the Channel Islands, and the UK phase 1. And we're now in the middle of, in the process of landing Hong Kong and Singapore. So my introduction to Cutover came in the Swiss project, Swiss Luxembourg project, when I had the opportunity to work alongside Kerstin and her team. It was a very successful collaboration, and it gave me a lot of insights to the world of Cutover, lots of learnings. And so I'm going to share a little bit what I've learned and over the years, and as I try to improve in the successive projects which I've done. So Kerstin, it was very interesting when you were talking about, the critical success factors, and that brought me back to a few points. The first is, as part of a manager, it's imperative to really understand the sequencing of your tasks. You really need to know what's coming and what's next, and the dependencies or interdependencies even is very important. Oftentimes you may be asked to, or you may be called upon to make some operational adjustments in your execution, and you need to understand if you can start some tasks early, or if you can defer, or if you must stick to a rigid sequence. But it's very, very important to understand your activities and see if you can tweak during execution as you make any adjustments. The second is, or slightly linked to that, is the idea of putting in, when we put together a plan, I have this habit of putting in buffers because you just never know what may go wrong. So sometimes, you put in some buffers, and as you execute, you hope not to use all your buffers. I'd rather be in a position where maybe you finish slightly early because you have buffers, but if you're running very late and you use up all your buffers, then that could jeopardize your execution. So building in buffers as you plan is always something good to do. Having a robust cutover organization. There's nothing worse than having an organization where people don't really know what they're doing or they're supposed to do. And Kerstin, you were spot on when you said, we have to train, the cutover, we have to practice is important. We can't, you don't want to do this for the first time at the live event, okay? And you need to know who's doing what are the escalation paths, what are our communication channels, our resource plan. You need to make sure that people know their roles and responsibilities. The cutover manager, of course, he or she sits in the command center, but then you also have the cutover organization with different roles within that. It could be a defect manager, it could be someone running around to resolve technical issues, or you could have some what we call at the time cutover officers helping to make sure that your resources turn up on time. So it's very important to have a robust cutover organization with everyone understanding their role within that. And this is mainly achieved by practicing it. And so people really understand. And also, the governance, so it's important to simulate the decisioning, the control points you talked about, Kerstin, how we ensure that we are on track. If we have issues, how we escalate, and also the decisions, how we make go, no go decisions. So communication is key here. I can give you some anecdotes on, when you're, say, running late or you're a bit ahead of schedule, you need to know, your stakeholders need to know. If you're involved in a huge cutover, which involves lots and lots of people, hundreds of people. I remember, Kerstin, in our resource plan in I think Switzerland and Luxembourg, we had something like 200 people. So it's important that we're communicating effectively and using all the channels which we defined. So it's important to have a good communication plan. If you're late, people need to know. If you're early, people need to know. Someone may need to start their tasks at 6 o'clock in the evening, but say you're 2 hours ahead of schedule. We need to find ways of of ensuring that everyone is aware of how the execution is progressing. And the last point I want to reflect on from my experiences, I want to give an anecdote of something which happened in Guernsey. And this was, I think Vlad on the call, Kerstin, you may recall this. I think during execution, we had the production servers that kept on crashing in the morning. And I thought that, someone was deliberately trying to jinx the cutover. But then, a cutover manager must also be prepared to manage a crisis. How do you make sure that the problem is understood, people are working on it, and they're giving timely feedback, timely updates, and ensuring that you resolve the whatever issue comes up as you execute your cutover. So those are some of the things I wanted to reflect on, Kerstin. I know you've touched on a lot. There's a lot of good nuggets and so many things which you've just brought back lots of memories. But I just wanted to highlight a few of the points that I've just talked about. So I'm happy to take any questions if anyone has any. Yeah.
Thank you, George. Before we go to the question key, now the floor is yours. I think it would be good if you could also give a short introduction about yourself and then your experience as providing a cutover platform.
Thanks, Kerstin. I just love listening to yourself and George. I love the focus on the cutover, because all too often it's felt that, the hard yards are in sort of building this new complex thing, getting all the agreements in place, and then it's just going to go into live operations in a very simple way, and nothing will go wrong there. So maybe we only think about that maybe a month before go live or something like that, which has certainly been my experience in a number of cases. And I feel like I was very fortunate to work on London 2012 Olympic Games, and I think even then we'd say that you could spend ages building the stadium and everything else like that, but the most complex sort of directed graph of human activity, was in the opening ceremony that is really the cutover to the live operation of the Olympic Games, and that is the most complicated thing. And the focus should be on how you get that stuff, and it needs rigor, it needs people, process to get it right. I love looking at your master plan and how the storybooks and run books fit together. And George, you bringing that alive with your stories. It's certainly similar to mine and very heartfelt. My background, quick introduction would be I started in the space industry, where I fell in love with having the live telemetry of a critical event. You knew exactly what was happening millisecond by millisecond. It was very visual. You had people in the room together to get this critical event over the line. The sort of collaboration between the human component and the machine component was absolutely awesome. And I really loved all of that. And then came to work as a technology consultant in the enterprise around taking tech from build into run, and found that that wasn't the case in many cases because of some of the things that you've talked about, Kerstin and George. It was often very frustrating to be able to plan in an organization like a mega large bank all the cutovers that were going to happen in amongst the other changes that were occurring. And so you'd talk to a CIO who'd be saying, I really want to make sure so next week goes well, the 4 weeks after, and how would they be getting data? They'd have like a spreadsheet they'd get out of an IT service management platform, because change tickets aren't booked till just 5 to 8 days before the event. So everyone flies blind before that, and then you have to defer cutovers and change, and we just felt that was awful. And also felt that the execution was awful as well, and people struggling so much between situations where people wanted to use automated tooling to do more of the technology change, but the control of that in a large organization that's regulated is very difficult. And so you have to have a lot of really careful human control over that to make sure it's really steered effectively. And so, as you said, Kerstin, it's very administrative, these things. I would spend my time in some of these events every hour, spending first 20 minutes phoning around the globe to understand status. Has sort of Fiona in Texas, have you finished? And sort of Fred in Singapore, can you start? And then I'd spend the next 20 minutes furiously writing my rolling email to stakeholders. And then I'd get on a call with stakeholders in the final 20 minutes to explain it's amber at the moment, but we're going to get back to green shortly. And then I'd just repeat that hour, those 20-minute loops, 15 or 16 times in a row. And things around me could be exploding, and I'd know the most about the event sometimes. And I could never help people because I was administrating the event, and it was so frustrating. And so we like you, Kerstin, if things hit the press, things would be trading, people would be trading on paper, all these things, because they hadn't got the rigor and the preparation to cut over, the processes that you brought to life, and George has with the stories so well. So I absolutely agree, this preparation is absolutely critical. And so we were frustrated at that situation, and so decided to build a platform to try and take the administration out of it, and also help integrate with the automated tooling to avoid people sometimes in cutovers having to sort of pretend to be machines and sort of press the script button or press the patch button where you want that to happen automatically and only bring the human in if it goes wrong. And then so we went on a journey to build a prototype. Got used in one bank, opened up across the globe with the Cutover organization, took Series A funding to run at this space, which we really feel is the next stage of human and machine collaboration. And now having sort of 2 out of the top 3 US banks by size using Cutover, 3 out of the top 5 investment banks for all of the exact problems that you've talked about there. And I think what we think about that in offering that platform to augment the great things that Kerstin and George you've talked about is to bring observability, so to understand the flight path of all the cutovers coming in, to keep that and make that seamless, so people don't have to defer and you can meet commitments, because then that's integrated with various systems, so people aren't rekeying things. We're pulling data from CMDB and Jira and things like that to make sure that's a great place for people to have that. We're helping with the orchestration, so rather than having to ask Fred in Texas if he's finished and Fiona in Singapore if they started, Cutover provides the directed graph of the human-machine activities, and as soon as Fred's finished, Fiona's got an SMS, pulled into the operational theatre, understands context, can say the task is done, hopefully within the 30 minutes and not 1.5 days later. Kerstin is often, I've had that experience too, of those sorts of things. And also to provide the stakeholder reporting, because just take that automatic reporting, no human bias in it, people can see it, you can choose who to share it with, of course, that's also very carefully done. And the important point that you mentioned of the audit trail, because a lot of the time in these very regulated industries, you want to show that change was conducted with integrity. And as the regulator more and more focuses on, change is the cause of the outage because of all the problems that we've talked about of not doing it in a really robust way, that regulators aren't just looking for how do you make things more operationally resilient from after the case, they're looking to prevent it with a really good rigor around the cutover. So I think the things you say around there are fantastic points, and we feel the audit trail providing that for people is really important as steps forward. And they're the things I thought to share from your very provocative and great story, Kerstin, and great slides, and George, the things you've shared.
Thank you, Keith. I guess your platform would then be, if we are starting a discussion, and later I'm coming to Vlad and his discussion, is then the full digitalization of cutover, allowing you also to do the cutover fully virtual.
Absolutely right. So we've been humbled by words of clients recently that said there was an 80 billion asset transfer that went across 4 very mega large organizations. And it was just as these unprecedented times started, and only the first component of that, that people were suddenly sent to work from home. And they would say, we would never have been able to do this because you can't tap your colleague on the shoulder, that now that Cutover has that capability. And yes, sometimes it is like a directed graph of 7,000 activities over 3,000 people and machine jobs. And sometimes it's a bit more simple. It can be like 10 to 15, but it's a really important thing that a regulator might see. But you've got to cope with all of those in often remote working situations, far more remote and diverse than we've encountered before on these things. Absolutely right.
Yeah. So now, Vlad, I think you have collected maybe some questions.
I haven't really seen any questions within the chat, but I think I have 1 or 2 of myself, maybe where I can, gather a little bit of your feedback, right? So in the beginning, we were talking more around the cutover management being in charge of defining the cutover scope, right? And
Yes.
This is one important part that goes hand in hand with project management, especially at the beginning of the project, right? So my question is, how do you see the cutover management within the project organization? More within the driving seat together with the project manager, or should it have a different role?
Mm-hmm. If I start answering this one, but I'm pretty sure George has there also an opinion, I would assume that at the beginning, the cutover manager is a little bit part-time working for the project manager. And throughout the test execution, the roles are a little bit changing, whereas then at the cutover, the project manager should step back and leave the show to the cutover manager, who has just prepared everything and knows everything, and then should run the show. And the project manager should more orchestrate the stakeholders in the background and support the key stakeholders on forming the opinion and building up all the knowledge in the background. So it's starting at the beginning where the project manager is fully in charge and the cutover manager is working for him. This throughout the project, but in the moment the cutover is starting, I think the cutover manager should be in charge, and the project manager should step back a little bit and leave the cutover manager and orchestrating everything. And the role of the project manager is then more doing all the stakeholder management in the background. That would be my opinion. But George, I would be interested, what is your opinion on that?
Yes, thanks. So Kerstin, yes. So first of all, I think it's the point of, at some point in the project, you transform from a project organization to a cutover organization belies the fact that, the cutover starts, small, looking at the MBRs in the and building scope, understanding scope, but not managing the project per se, but managing what and understanding what we'll need to move from a legacy or the old world into the new world, and building on that. Of course, working alongside the project manager, understanding scope, but not replacing or not doing the job of the project manager for the entire project, because there's a lot more that the project manager has responsibility for. So yes, at some point, Vlad, once that transition to Cutover is close, and once you start transforming from a project organization to Cutover organization, you, the Cutover manager, then is in charge of ensuring that we land safely. Okay, but then to do so, you start with your building blocks, with your MBRs, and by the time you're doing your last one or going into your dress rehearsal, you should have a complete picture of every single element, data, and otherwise that has to be that has to transition to the new world. So complements the project manager initially, but does not replace the project manager. Yeah.
Vlad, you have further questions for us?
Maybe one more, because I've seen a lot of projects when we talk about cutover management, where we're strongly linking it to the migration team, right? Maybe for everybody in the call, would you like to just try and split these two roles a little bit, or do you see them as one and then the same?
You mean the cutover manager and the migration lead?
Yeah.
I don't think they are the same. The cutover manager's role is much broader than just the migration lead. But in order to make the overall team efficient, I think the migration lead to a certain moment should then report to the cutover manager if it's coming to the execution. But in the organization, I would not see this as the same role. This, for me, are two different roles. But depending on the size of a project team, if you have then also the necessity to combine roles, I can understand why people are coming to the conclusion to combine it, yes. But this would be not my perfect solution. I would see it in two different roles, but it depends on the size of the project.
Yeah, and also I think data is a central component in Cutover, but it's not the only component. It's orchestrating so many moving parts. So yes, the migration manager will be ensuring that he migrates or the data is properly migrated, but then the Cutover manager has an overarching responsibility and a panoramic view of everything that needs to come together harmoniously. Now, can you do both? If it's a small, very small project, maybe you can get away with it, but again, it's not something, the big implementations which we've seen and which we've done is not something which I recommend.
Yeah, you should have there more than one person. Okay,
so now we're starting to have a few questions in the chat. So the first one comes from Silva. So Silva is asking, which new trends do you see coming for the future regarding cutover management, with the recent worldwide challenges?
I can just repeat what I have already seen or said. I think we are moving more to a fully digital cutover, which should be fully virtual possible, which requires also more tooling, not just our Excel sheet, which we usually use. Therefore, I'm fully with Key that their cutover platform is offering lots of benefits. So I think in cutover management, we would see a digitalization to execute cutovers virtual, and therefore we need also new toolings in order to do so. I don't see changes in the tasks which are necessary. I just already saw over the last years that regulators are getting more and more important, and therefore risk management also more and more important, as well as audit trail. But that's not new. This is already there since years. Really the new trend I'm currently seeing with our crisis we are currently in is doing cutovers fully virtual, and therefore I personally believe we need also additional tooling for that. Maybe George?
Yeah, just to add that I'm a convert, you know, I fully subscribe to that. And we've just done a technical cutover, and unfortunately we were still relying on updating SharePoint, you know, manually. And I think that, you know, there are better ways, the more efficient ways to do this, you know, and I'm more and more convert on the need for tooling, especially in the current context. I think the question was the context we're in today. You know, how do you orchestrate something so big? You know, so tooling becomes an imperative in my view. Yeah.
Yes. Vlad, you said you have more questions?
Yes. One question comes from Florine. So, what are the roles and responsibility on the cutover service and the responsibilities of the business acceptance toward each other?
Not sure I fully understand it, but the cutover management, from my perspective, is the orchestration and management side. But the owner of the new platform, whatever it is always business. So they need also to buy in any plan of the cutover, and they need to take all the decisions. You cannot, as cutover management or cutover manager, take decisions on behalf of the owner of the platform. They have to live with the consequences. And therefore, the earlier they are involved and the earlier they understand how the cutover is executed, the better for all parties. To bring business just to the table when the cutover is executed will be very difficult, because then they don't understand the different steps and what they have to do and what the decision will be. Therefore, I would always recommend business needs to be involved right from the beginning. They should sign off the strategy, because it has usually also implications for them. And then they need to be involved in all the little steps when the snowball is getting bigger and bigger. And then starting with dress rehearsals, they need to be fully involved and also train how to take decisions. I hope I answered the question.
Yep, I think that's spot on, Kerstin. So we have one last question and also one more minute. So this question comes from Darren, and his point is what are the pain points you have seen when planning cutover events? So one example he's pointing out, you know, collecting all the team run books into a single master run book, and you know how could the cutover tool help with this?
To orchestrate the different story books and tasks in the storybook? I'm not sure I understand the question fully.
Oh, I think the first part is around what are the actual main pain points when planning the cutover?
So no, for me, the most important point at any cutover is that you know what you are doing. And I think George mentioned this also, that the cutover manager needs to understand what the tasks are and what the dependencies are. I think that's key. Despite any tools, you still need to understand, because just when you understand all the tasks, you can also take the right decisions when the crisis is coming. And there will be crisis. And if I look back, what was one of my biggest experiences at the cutover, then George, I guess you would laugh, but my shouting event with Dan King was one of the biggest lessons learned, that there needs to be one person in charge who is following the crisis and is taking a final decision. I think that would be, whatever tooling you have, you cannot replace that. But yes, the tooling can help in putting the storybook together.
I completely agree. I think it's important, as George said earlier, you have that dependency map of all of the activities because things will change. And we really enjoyed being able to take that and bring it alive from being in Excel, or as you said, George, on a SharePoint or a Word document, to being able to, when you do the dry runs and other things, you can see what comes before what. And people say, oh no, I thought that was before that. I thought that was after that. When you see it, clarity, orchestrating it, we've loved trying to bring that alive in the Cutover run book, because as you say, sometimes you want that dynamic critical path, because maybe you're forecasting 2 hours past your change window and you need to do something to sort of bring it back, and that's a tough time, rather than just wasting that particular slot and having to go roll back and do it another day. So I think yeah, we really enjoy supporting that bit, but as you say, you've got to know the dependencies going into it.
Yeah. George, anything to add from your side?
Yeah, so I think there are lots of efficiency gains you can get from tooling. It's having done this several times, you're asking you can't help but realize that there are better ways of doing this, and I think that's where tooling has a big value proposition. But alongside that, you also need to have that acumen and the expert judgment. The decisions you have to to take, and the operational adjustments you have to make. So I think if you have a good tool, and that it helps enormously. You don't have to worry about so many things. You just know that, okay, as Cutover manager, are we executing? Are we on time? Issues coming up? Are they flagged up by tool, which is helping? Obviously, are we late? Are we delayed? And that helps you, gives you the information then to make those judgment calls.
Yeah. Thank you, George. Thank you, Kate.
Yeah, thank you.
And thank you, Vlad. I think time is running out and we need to come to the end. Therefore, let me give you also 2 words. This was orchestrated by On Point Connect. This is a company where Vlad and me are working for. We are a small boutique, around 20 employees. We are acting in Switzerland, UK, Singapore, and Germany. Our slogan is, we make your strategy work. So we are not the strategy consultants, but we are the delivery guys. And then let me give you also an outlook to my next session. I will be now on a summer break. I'm going on holidays in July and August, but planning a next session on the 25th of September about project management and how to assess the majority of your project management, but also of the project. And there, I hope I have a discussion round to discuss how to do this in a structured way. I tried to publish already my little cookbook on LinkedIn in an article, and I would like to have a discussion round on how to do this in the most structured and efficient way. So that's the outlook of my next session. And otherwise, I can just thank all participants and especially my guest speakers. And I can just wish you a nice Friday wherever you are, and a nice weekend, and long and nice holidays. Even if there is a crisis, I think we should take some time off and relax a little bit. So thank you. Now is the time where I usually also stop recording. As a last hint, here is also our email address. If there are further questions left, then please send us an email. And now I'm trying to get to the point where I stop the recording.